Alright guys, coming in hot with some new content. A little bit about me before we get in. We are going to be doing a controller tier list today. So I've been around the bend. I've been gaming since I was probably 4 or something. First console was the Saturn. And then I started playing the regular Nintendo and everything. I've played at least every console at least once, if I didn't own them already. But yeah, started off with the Saturn, played the original Nintendo. I've played literally every mainstream console, either as a wee lad or as a big man. But yeah, let's get into it. Drop your hot takes in the chat. Drop your hot takes in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. And let's go ahead and get right into it. I think I'll be doing this in chronological order. Here are the rules. So the rules for my ranking are: you have to rank the controller based off of how well it feels, how well it functions, as well as, rank it based off of the games that came out on that console. So I'm not going to be ranking an NES controller based on how well I could quickscope dudes in Call of Duty, if that makes sense. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. So this is the spread. This is what we got going on. And let me go ahead and upset some people right out the gate. Regular NES. And in my opinion, it's pretty alright for the games that came out on it. However, it's super uncomfortable. The D-pad kind of sucks, to be honest. It's been a while since I've held one. D-pad kind of sucks. This shit's sharp. It works well for the games that came out, but you can't help but feel like maybe more buttons were required in some of these games, which is why I'm gonna place it down at the bottom, right out the gate, down at the bottom. Moving on though, Genesis controller. Keep in mind, the Sega Genesis controller didn't have 6 buttons, it had 3. which is kind of weird. Imagine sprinting with A. Yeah, imagine sprinting with A and then going over to C. But the more the better. Some of the controls were limited, like in Mortal Kombat and some fighting games where you have to hold start and press a button to do something. The only thing is it's a little bit more comfy. The D-pad is probably a little bit worse, but at the same time there are more buttons, I guess. Alright, moving on. So we got the Genesis, we got the NES. There was no Super Genesis, but there was a Super Nintendo. Let me go ahead and pull that controller right here. So I do have something that looks kind of like a Super NES controller right here. Feels almost the same. It's got L and R buttons, whatever. Really good for the games that came out on the system. Let's go ahead and look at Super Nintendo games. Yeah, Mario Kart, if you got this, that's fine. You got 4 buttons on this, and L and R, and start and select. You're fine. The D-pad feels pretty good. It's definitely better than the NES, but it's not perfect. But for games like Donkey Kong Country, A Link to the Past, Super Mario, Super Metroid, Star Fox, maybe not for Star Fox, but for a lot of these games, this works out super well. The only thing might be Street Fighter 2, just because it's a little clunky to do some of the inputs. But yeah, most of these games work super well. Anytime I boot up a 2D game, I'll plug this into my computer or into my Switch or something. It's classic. It really set the pace for pretty much every game controller to come with these 4 little buttons right here, and shoulder buttons. Not a lot of controllers had this layout. Once we get into our next couple of controllers, you'll definitely see other people were inspired by the ingenious design of this one controller. I'm gonna go ahead and rank this kind of high just because it works so well with so many of the games that came out on that console. It doesn't feel half bad. It's kind of comfy in the hands. It does get a little tiresome after a while just because big man hands on tiny controller. But with that, I'm putting it high B. High B, low A. The next controller that came out was the PlayStation 1 controller. Now, I've played the PS1. I've held the PS1 controller. This picture might have the 2 sticks on it, but I'm not going to count that just because that's an aftermarket thing. I know they sold it stock with some of the systems later on, but when the PS1 came out, it didn't have any stick. It just had the D-pad and the buttons. Yeah, look at that shit, dude. Look at that shit. That looks horrible. But the D-pad design hasn't changed much since the PS1 or the buttons. But I really don't like PlayStation D-pad. I'm just gonna lay that out. So for the PlayStation D-pad, you basically have like 4 of these, and it's super mushy. You can't really feel when you're pressing something, and when you press hard into something, you know, it's just not a good feeling. It's not a good feeling. For that, I'm gonna have to put it in low C tier. And a lot of games that came out on the PS1 almost required analog control. Let's go ahead and look at some of these PS1 games. Don't know what that is. That's fine. Metal Gear Solid would have benefited greatly from an analog stick. Castlevania, that's fine. Parappa the Rapper, sure. Gran Turismo. Imagine playing a racing game with a D-pad. But yeah, so many of these games benefited from an analog stick, and for the PS1 to ship out without one in it kind of sucks. I think Call of Duty also came out on the PS1 as well. With that, I'm gonna put it in C tier. Almost want to put it in high D tier just because I do not like the D-pad on the PlayStation 1. And then the next one would probably be the N64 controller. I actually think the N64 controller is alright. I know a lot of people like to shit on it. The stick feels super weird. Like, it doesn't feel like a regular control stick at all. It's got like a super skinny base, and if you could see the hinge, it definitely doesn't work like, you know, a modern control stick. And it feels weird just moving it in a circle. The buttons, okay. I really like the triggers. Very satisfying to click. Shoulder buttons are cool. The D-pad on this sucks. It's super mushy for like no reason, which is kind of sad because I feel like a lot of fighting games would have benefited from this controller, because right out the gate you got that 6-button layout for like Street Fighter and stuff. But for the games that mainly came out on here, like Star Fox, Ocarina of Time, Mario 64, this was a great controller for those games, and they were doing something completely different at the time with an analog stick just right out the box. But for games like Legend of Zelda, Mario Kart, Paper Mario, Diddy Kong Racing, Star Fox 64, all these bangers, you know, this is fine. This is absolutely fine. Yeah, this is absolutely fine. This is a really good controller as far as I'm concerned. But it does have its flaws, like this weird 3-prong design, and that weird joystick, and that shitty D-pad. So I'll be putting it in C. Might even move it down later. Depends on what the tier list looks like. We'll also be looking at the Saturn controller, another system that handled 3D that didn't ship out with an analog stick. It's basically just the Genesis controller, but with the extra 3 buttons included right out the gate. You didn't have to buy an aftermarket controller for that. It worked well for like Virtual Fire. What even came out on the Saturn? What even came out on the Saturn? I only played 2 games, and for like 5-year-old me, that was enough. It was Sonic and Knights. And that's all I needed. Panzer Dragoon, which I think is like an on-rail shooter, just like Star Fox, Virtual Fighter, Virtua Cop, Sonic Jam, whatever. A lot of racing games, again, didn't come out with a joystick out the gate. It seems kind of weird. Kind of weird, champ. But the OG Sega Saturn controller, I mean, it's fine. Kind of sucks. Honestly, it's tied with the PS1 controller for being kind of behind the curve and also being like generally bad. PS2 controller. I don't believe they had analog triggers on the PS2 controller. It was just buttons, which is nice, actually. I really like that over the PS3 controller. But if you've ever held one of these in your hand, it feels like it's gonna break apart any second. Like, it's so creaky. That might just be because I played a bunch of old PlayStation controllers, but that's how I feel. Still got the shitty D-pad, you know, those mushy buttons, whatever. Not very clicky, not very tactile. It's almost like hard to feel. And the buttons are almost flush with the controller. And that's even worse on the PS2 because it's almost like indented. Yeah, because of these things right here, it made everything feel even worse. than it already was. And with that, I'll be putting the PS2 controller kind of low. Also, the sticks were kind of shit. Not a lot of first-person shooters came out during that era for the PS2, but the thumbsticks were so close that you did this a lot. If you were like strafing right and then looking left, you know, you'll be thumb wrestling yourself in no time. For the sake, I'm going to be putting PS2 and PS3 in the same kind of grouping, but the PS2 controller is better than the PS3 controller because analog triggers were kind of gross, something like that. Now the behemoth right here, this guy, actually not that bad, but as a controller, it is actually, it's a good controller. I don't know what those buttons are doing up there. C- on the fatty, A tier on the slim one. I don't know. Look at what we got on the Xbox. We got the 6 button and that D-pad. And what the fuck going on here, bro? What is this stick? Why is it different from this one? That kind of pisses me off. I'm gonna give it a B. Low B. Lowest B. Lowest B as B can be. GameCube controller. Again, we're basing this off of the games that came out for the system. GameCube controller. Kinda pog. Kinda pog. Let's look at GameCube games. Smash Melee. Of course. GameCube controller. Fucking pug. Smash Melee. Perfect. Mario Sunshine. With this thing, perfect. But yeah, you got, you know, your control stick with all the notches. Like, you can feel yourself doing a dragon punch on a control stick. Like, that's crazy. The buttons were laid out in a super cool way. The A button's the main button, and then you got all these buttons on the side for like equipment or special moves, whatever. Triggers, analog and digital. Only one bumper though. Kind of weird. Two things that are trash about it are these bottom bits right here, the C stick and the D-pad. I played the collector's edition of like Zelda, trying to play like Zelda 1, Zelda 2, and with this D-pad, dude, it's so bad. It's not very clicky, it's super small. C stick, same thing, it's super small. There's a reason why not a lot of first-person shooters came out on this, but for the games that did come out on it, Melee, Wind Waker, Mario Kart Double Dash, you know, this makes a fine camera stick, but it's not a good aiming stick. Like, you can even see it in like Metroid Prime. They didn't even do like the regular first-person controls we've been doing since COD on the PS1. Even if you play like Star Fox Assault and you do the twin stick mode, you can tell like it's kind of bad. But yeah, for most of the games that came out on the system, this controller just works really good. Except maybe Pikmin. I don't know what they were smoking over there when they made that game. I can't imagine playing Sonic on anything but a GameCube controller. I know it came out on the Xbox, PS2, but I don't know, the GameCube controller is just way better. And with that, I'm gonna be giving the GameCube controller high A, low S, just because the limitations of that controller with the C stick and the D-pad kind of brought it back a little bit. There's no real way to play any like FPS on this controller without getting pissed at this little yellow nipple right here. So yeah, I think A is a pretty fair ranking. Oh, I guess the Dreamcast did come out. It's kind of like the Saturn 3D controller, except the thumbstick's way better, D-pad's way better. The analog triggers are just like the Xbox 360, which is poked. So that's gonna get an A from me. A little bit behind the GameCube controller. All right, let's move on to the next gen. I got everybody here, right? Like, if I'm wrong on something, if you want to argue with me, argue with me. Now, let me tell you something about the Xbox 360 controller. This shit nice. For like first-person shooters, this shit nice. For 3D platformers, the D-pad, ugh, ugly. The triggers feel amazing. Bumpers feel good. The right stick and the left stick are pretty pug. They've got this cool like concave like design, complete with like grips even on the right stick. So even though it's already concave, gripping your thumb, they got that extra shit in there. Make sure it doesn't sweat off when you really get gaming. The only thing I could really say that's bad about this controller is where they put the battery. Because when you're playing, you'll probably be playing like this or like this, and after a while, you know, you'll feel your fingers kind of push up against that battery, kind of make your fingers sore. But other than that, this is a really good controller. If you have a wired one, it's probably one of one of the top controllers ever. That being said, I'm gonna make this set the standard for S tier. It's definitely higher than GameCube. It suited all the games that came out on that system very well. The D-pad isn't as bad as, you know, people say. It's definitely clicky, definitely tactile. I could definitely feel myself moving around. The D-pad's kind of uncomfortable, but you know, it's still like clicky, it's still responsive, and it's easy to do like a dragon punch, and you could feel it go from right down and down right. It does give you that tactile feedback. The buttons, you can hear them when you press them. You can hear that shit. It's golden, dude. It's definitely gonna be the gatekeeper for S tier. And then I already ranked PS3. I hate the PS3 controller. I hate the PS3 controller. D-pad sucks. The L2 and R2 triggers practically slip off of your fingers. That's why in COD, they make you use the bumpers to aim and shoot, and then the triggers do grenades. It's that bad. The buttons are almost flush with the controller. It makes them feel mushy. The sticks are way too close together. You're thumb wrestling yourself every time you try to turn and move at the same time. And then, did I say the D-pad sucks? Because the D-pad really sucks. The D-pad sucks so bad. And then the Wii. Where are we putting the Wii controller? It feels good in the hand. Definitely feels like something you should be swinging around. All the buttons are pretty clicky. You know. It's definitely better than the Nintendo controller. It's definitely not garbage tier. But at the same time, I feel like the gimmick was forced. So if you try to play anything that wasn't like Nintendo related, you would have to do a lot of this, a lot of motion controls, not a lot of good, you know, motion aiming or anything like that. But at the same time, Wii Tennis kind of slaps. I wouldn't want to play tennis any other way but with this thing. Wii Sports was such a banger that it almost makes me want to put this into C tier. We're also factoring in the Nunchuck because that came with the console. Nunchuck kind of sucks. It's got the cool control stick like the GameCube. It's got 2 bumpers, and it also has motion sensing capability, but the cord was so short you can't really spread your arms apart as much as you'd like. A lot of games on the Wii you have to stand up and play. It just doesn't feel nice sitting on your ass while you're doing it. I'm inclined to agree with my man Alec Mel 67. I'm gonna make it the highest controller on D tier, no questions asked. I don't know. All right, we'll come back to it once we get all them out. Does it get extra points for being innovative? Is it really innovative? Because not a lot of modern games use motion controls. It was definitely a fad of last gen. I guess you could point to like VR that got inspired by Wii, but like gyro controls part for so long, and I guess it kind of did innovate the motion control genre. But who the fuck is doing that, dude? Who the fuck is doing that? Also, the PS3 controller had motion controls that were more in line with modern motion controls right now, even on the Nintendo Switch, where you can kind of tilt it up and down, left and right to aim, or whatever it is you have to do. I don't think I'm gonna give it points for being innovative. It definitely did change the landscape of its time. Here's the thing with the Wii. That's your controller for every game that ever came out on that system. That's the controller you have to use. And sometimes it could just feel like it was tacked on or forced. Only some games really took good advantage of it and made it work. But in general, it was kind of trash. It did motivate PlayStation to create their own version of a motion controller, but who's using it now? Who the fuck is using PlayStation Move? Unless it's for PlayStation VR. In that case, I want to ask you, who the fuck is using PlayStation VR, man? Yeah, I think it's not innovative. You could call the Nintendo 64 controller innovative with its design, but nobody's doing it because it was trash. But yeah, D tier. Solid D on the Wiimote. ZZ Trooper making me think it twice actually brought it down. Current gen. Let's fucking go. And let me tell you something about the Joycons. They're alright. For most games, most of Nintendo's mainline games, they're alright. Try to play something modern, like a shooter, or even try to play like a platformer with this shitty fucking D-pad right here. It isn't that good. It does get points for letting you basically hold the controller however you want. That is big brownie points. It lets you relax. It lets people maybe with like disabilities or something play the game more easy. But let's think of the everyday man. Let's think of little Timmy playing Fortnite. Look at these thumbsticks. Look at how small these fuckers are. Would you really want to aim with these? Sure, you could do the motion control aiming, whatever. These are kind of trash. The buttons are cool. The triggers are cool. The Nintendo Switch controller is gonna have to go slightly in front of the Nintendo 64 controller. Solid C tier for the Nintendo Switch controller. Controlling stuff like 3D platformers, it's amazing. You get to relax so much. Games where you don't have to aim as much, like Breath of the Wild, it really is great, and the motion controls work really well. But if you try to play anything else like Fortnite or whatever shooter came out on the Switch, it starts to show its flaws. And if you log on to the NES emulator or the Super NES emulator on the Switch, it definitely shows that you need that D-pad. It's cool that you could have two controllers that you could give to your little brother or something, but at the same time, was it really worth it? And then we've got the PS4 controller and the Xbox One controller. Now, let me get this out of the way straight out the gate. The Xbox One controller is fucking amazing. It is super good. I cannot say one thing bad about it, besides maybe the triggers are a little bit too harsh on the fingers. If you play racing games for a long time, it could start digging into you, start pinching a nerve. But at the end of the day, that might be your problem for gorilla gripping this shit. The control sticks are sick. The D-pad, they've improved so much. It's probably the best D-pad on the market right now. Not only is it very tactile, and you can definitely feel which way you're pressing all the time, but it's also clicky. It's super clicky. It's super clicky. You could definitely feel, like if I did a Dragon Punch, which is Shoryuken in Street Fighter, which is right, neutral, down, down, forward, I could feel a click for every one of those inputs. The only flaw is, yeah, probably AA batteries. But at the same time, I think it gets brownie points for being able to connect just straight into the console. But yeah, Xbox controller probably best controller. And in my opinion, Xbox One controller, best controller. It's super comfy. And like Tosh said, the only flaw is that it uses fucking batteries. But let's go ahead and move on to the PS4 controller. Now this is where I'm gonna get some hate. This is where I'm gonna get some hate right here. I think the PS4 controller is kind of lame. Let me tell you why. The sticks, I feel, are slightly shorter, kind of relating more to the Joycons, but they're not as short as the Joycons. It's just the Xbox One has way better sticks. The buttons, let me show you something real quick. Let me show you something real quick. This is what buttons on the Xbox One controller sound like, right? That's me pressing the Xbox controller buttons. I don't even need to tell you that I could feel myself pressing these buttons, because it makes so much fucking noise. Here's the PS4 buttons. Weak. They don't pop out as fast. They're really shallow. They're really short. Another thing I don't like about the PS4 controller, the D-pad. They kept the same shitty D-pad from the PS1, from the PS2, from the PS3. This piece of shit plastic right here. You think these are all like separate buttons or something, but they're not. It's not clicky at all. It's barely tactile, and if you play any like fighting game with this controller, it's gonna be hard to feel yourself doing something like a Shoryuken or any input that requires down and left or down and right or up and right and up and left. They did fix the sticks though. They did fix the sticks from the PS3, PS2. You're not thumb wrestling yourself when you're playing them. The bumpers feel alright. The triggers feel okay. All honesty, it's a pretty okay controller. And I'm gonna put it in the okay tier. And that's where it goes. That's our tier list, ladies and gentlemen.